You have the job, maybe not the dream job, but a real job. One that pays the bills and fills the resume and gives you an answer when someone asks what you do. You have the apartment or the house or the space you work to afford. You have the relationship or the friendships or at least the contacts in your phone. You have the routine, the morning alarm, the commute, the meetings, the grocery run, the evening on the couch, the weekend that passes too quickly, the Monday that arrives too soon. You have what you're supposed to have. You've checked the boxes that the world said to check, and from the outside, everything looks fine. But something is wrong, something you can't name, something that doesn't show up in the photographs or the social media posts or the conversations where people ask how you're doing and you say, good, busy. You know, and they nod because they're saying the same thing and nobody stops to ask what the word good actually means anymore. The something is a feeling, or rather the absence of a feeling. The absence of the feeling you expected to have by now, the feeling of aliveness, of purpose, of waking up and wanting to be awake, of doing the things you do and feeling like they matter, like they connect to something, like they're yours. Instead, there's a flatness, a grayness, a going through the motions quality to the days that makes Tuesday indistinguishable from Thursday and January indistinguishable from June. You're not depressed exactly. You can still function. You still laugh sometimes. You still enjoy certain moments. But underneath the functioning and the laughing and the moments, there's an emptiness that you can't explain to anyone because you can't explain it to yourself. Because how do you explain that everything is fine and you feel nothing? There's a voice under the emptiness, a quiet voice, and the voice has been trying to tell you something for a long time. Maybe years, maybe decades. The voice has been getting louder, but you've been getting better at not hearing it. Better at filling the silence with noise, with busyness, with scrolling, with streaming, with substances, with productivity, with anything that prevents the quiet moment where the voice would finally be audible. The voice isn't destructive. It isn't dangerous. It's the most fundamental part of you trying to communicate the most important information you'll ever receive. The information is this: the life you're living is not yours. 5 chapters where the emptiness comes from, how you learn to silence the voice, what the voice is actually trying to say, why the system needs you to stay empty, and how to start listening. 1 hour. This one requires quiet, not just external quiet. The willingness to sit with something uncomfortable. The willingness to let the voice speak. Let's listen. Chapter 1. The architecture of emptiness, where the feeling went. The emptiness didn't arrive suddenly. It was built. Constructed slowly across years of small surrenders, small compromises, small decisions where you chose the expected option over the authentic one so many times that you forgot there was an authentic option. The emptiness is the accumulated distance between who you are and who you've been performing, between the life you're living and the life that would feel like yours, between the self the world asked you to be and the self you actually are. The performance began early, before you had language for it, before you understood what was happening. As a child, you expressed yourself freely. You said what you felt. You wanted what you wanted. You moved toward the things that interested you and away from the things that didn't. And then the corrections began, not cruelly usually, not with malice, with the ordinary, well-intentioned pressure of socialization. Don't be so loud, don't be so sensitive, don't be so weird, don't be so much. Big boys don't cry. Good girls don't argue. Smart kids don't struggle. Successful people don't complain. Each correction was small. Each one was survivable. Each one, individually, was barely noticeable. But collectively, across thousands of interactions over years of development, the corrections built an architecture, a performance architecture, a learned system for presenting the version of yourself that receives approval rather than the version of yourself that is actually you. This is crucial. The performance architecture wasn't built by enemies. It was built by parents who wanted you to fit in, teachers who wanted you to succeed, friends who wanted you to belong, and a culture that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity in ways so subtle that most people never recognize the punishment for what it is. The architecture was built with love, with good intentions, with genuine concern for your well-being, as defined by people who were themselves living inside performance architectures they never recognized or questioned. The cost of the architect. Sure, the performance works. That's the problem. That's the trap. The version of you that was built to receive approval does receive approval, consistently, reliably. The compliant student gets the good grades and the teacher's praise and the parents' pride. The agreeable employee gets promoted because they don't create friction and they deliver what's expected and they make their manager's life easier. The accommodating partner maintains the relationship because they absorb conflict and adjust their needs and present the version of themselves that keeps the peace. The socially appropriate person maintains the social network because they say the right things and attend the right events and project the right image. The performance delivers the outcomes it was designed to deliver: approval, acceptance, advancement, the external markers of a life that's working. And because it delivers outcomes, you keep performing. Of course you do. The performance is rewarded. The authentic self, on the rare occasions it surfaces, is not rewarded. When you said the honest thing instead of the expected thing, the room went quiet. When you pursued the interest that didn't fit the plan, people expressed concern. When you showed the emotion that the architecture classified as inappropriate, the response was discomfort rather than connection. The authentic self learned early and learned thoroughly that the world rewards the performance and penalizes the real. And so the performance continued. For years, for decades, performing the version of yourself that works in the world while the authentic version sits inside the performance, unspoken, unacknowledged, increasingly distant, increasingly unfamiliar, increasingly silent. Not dead, never dead, but so far from the surface that reaching it requires excavation rather than simple expression. The emptiness is the distance between the performance and the person. This sentence is the core of this audiobook. Everything else flows from it. The emptiness is the distance. The greater the distance, the deeper the emptiness. A person living close to their authentic self, expressing what they actually feel without excessive filtering, pursuing what they actually want without constant reference to the approval system, saying no when they mean no and yes when they mean yes, and I don't know when they genuinely don't know, experiences the world as vivid, textured, meaningful, alive. Not because their circumstances are better than yours, because the experience is flowing through the real self rather than being filtered through the performance. The signal arrives unobstructed. The world touches the actual person. A person living far from their authentic self, saying the expected thing in every conversation, pursuing the approved path through every decision, maintaining the image in every interaction, suppressing the impulses and desires and truths that don't fit the performance's requirements, experiences the world as flat, gray, empty, muted. Not because the world is flat, because the performance layer between the self and the world blocks the texture, the way a pane of frosted glass blocks the view. You can tell there's something on the other side. You can sense color and movement and the suggestion of beauty, but you can't see it clearly. You can't feel it directly. Everything arrives filtered, dampened, reduced. The joy is muted. The connection is surface level. The experience of being alive is replaced by the experience of watching yourself be alive from behind glass. And the inability to fully feel, fully see, fully experience the life you're living is the emptiness. It was never about what you have. It was always about how much of you is present to experience what you have. Most people miss this about why the emptiness persists even when external circumstances improve. You get the promotion. The emptiness remains. You buy the house. The emptiness remains. You achieve the goal. The emptiness remains. Because the promotion, the house, and the goal were objectives of the performance self, not the authentic self. The performance self pursued them because they were expected, because they were approved, because they matched the script that the architecture was built to execute. Achieving them satisfies the architecture's requirements. It does not satisfy the person living inside the architecture. The person inside wanted something else, something the architecture never allowed them to identify, let alone pursue. And the achievement of the wrong goals, the architecture's goals, deepens the emptiness rather than filling it, because each achievement confirms that you can succeed at the performance while feeling nothing. And the nothing, compounding with each hollow success, becomes harder and harder to ignore. Chapter 2: How You Learn to Silence the Voice, the Training You Don't Remember. The quiet voice is the authentic self, the part of you that existed before the performance architecture was built, the part that still knows what you actually feel, what you actually want, what you would actually choose if the approval system weren't monitoring every decision. The voice has been speaking your entire life, and you've been trained systematically and thoroughly to ignore it. The emotional override training. As a child, you learned that certain emotions were acceptable and others were not. Anger was unacceptable in some households. Sadness was unacceptable in others. Fear was weakness. Joy was too loud. Need was too much. Each family, each school, each social environment had its own emotional rule book. And you learned the rule book the way every child learns the rules of their environment. Not through explicit instruction, usually, but through the responses your emotions received. The tears that were met with discomfort or impatience taught you that sadness was unwelcome. The anger that was met with punishment taught you that anger was dangerous. The enthusiasm that was met with mockery taught you that visible excitement was a vulnerability. And so you learned to manage your emotional expression, to present the emotions that were received well and suppress the ones that weren't. The suppression didn't eliminate the emotions, it redirected them. The anger you couldn't express became tension in your body. The sadness you couldn't show became a heaviness you carried without naming. The fear you couldn't admit became an anxiety that operated in the background of every decision. The authentic emotions didn't die. They went underground. They became the quiet voice. The voice that says something is wrong even when everything looks fine. The voice that feels the anger you learned not to show, and the sadness you learned not to share, and the desire you learned not to pursue. The voice is your emotional truth, and the truth has been underground so long that when it speaks, you barely recognize it as yours. This is crucial. The emotional override training didn't make you emotionally deficient. It made you emotionally divided. There is a surface self that presents the approved emotional display, the calm, the fine, the good busy you know. And there is a subsurface self that holds the actual emotional reality, the anger, the grief, the longing, the fear, the desire. The division is the emptiness, not the absence of feeling, the disconnection from feeling. The feelings are there. They've always been there. But the performance architecture has placed them behind a wall that you built as a child to survive an environment that couldn't hold your full emotional range. The wall was necessary then. It might not be necessary now. But the wall remains because it was built so early and reinforced so long that it feels like part of you rather than something you built. And dismantling something that feels like part of you feels like losing yourself, even though the opposite is true. The desire override training. Beyond emotions, you were trained to override your desires, the things you naturally gravitated toward, the subjects that fascinated you without anyone telling you they should, the activities that made time disappear, the types of people who felt like home before you learned to evaluate people by their utility, were subjected to the same approval framework that governed your emotional expression. Is this practical? Is this productive? Is this realistic? Is this going to lead somewhere respectable? Will this make money? Will this impress people at dinner parties? Will this provide a satisfying answer to the question, what do you do? Will this meet the criteria that the performance architecture uses to evaluate all choices? The desires that passed the approval filter were permitted, encouraged, even. The desire to study something profitable, the desire to pursue a stable career, the desire to build the kind of life that photographs well and summarizes neatly. These desires were approved and amplified. The desires that didn't pass were redirected, discouraged, or quietly extinguished through the simple and devastatingly effective mechanism of being ignored until they stopped insisting. You wanted to make art, but art wasn't practical, so you studied business and told yourself you'd do art on the weekends, and the weekends filled with other obligations, and the art supplies gathered dust, and eventually you threw them away and told yourself you'd outgrown the impulse. You wanted to work with your hands, but manual work wasn't prestigious enough for someone with your education. So you pursued a desk career, and your hands found nothing to do except type and scroll. And the satisfaction of making something tangible with your own body became a memory you stopped visiting. You wanted to live simply, but simplicity wasn't ambitious enough for someone with your potential. So you built the lifestyle the architecture required, and the maintenance of the lifestyle consumed the energy that the simple life would have freed. You wanted to say the honest thing in the meeting, but honesty wasn't strategic, so you said the strategic thing, and the honest thing sat in your throat and became part of the heaviness you carry home every evening. Each override was small. Each one made sense in context. Each one was a reasonable response to a real set of pressures and expectations that were themselves reasonable in the context of the system that produced them. And each one moved you further from the life that would have felt like yours and closer to the life that looks fine from the outside and feels empty from the inside. Not because the life you built is objectively bad, because the life you built was built by the architecture, not by you. And living inside someone else's design, even a good design, even a successful design, produces the specific quality of emptiness that brings people to audiobooks like this one. The emptiness of a well-built house that doesn't feel like home. Most people miss this about why the desire override training is so difficult to reverse in adulthood. The overrides didn't just redirect your choices. They damaged the mechanism that generates choices. They disconnected you from the internal compass that senses this, not that. After decades of ignoring your authentic desires in favor of approved alternatives, after decades of the compass pointing one direction and you walking the other, many people can no longer feel the compass at all. Ask them what they want for dinner, and they can answer because dinner is low stakes and the architecture doesn't monitor it. Ask them what they want from their career, and they'll give you the architecture's answer. Ask them what they actually want from their life. What would make them feel alive and purposeful and connected to their own existence? And they freeze. Not because the answer doesn't exist, because the connection to the answer has atrophied from decades of disuse the way a muscle atrophies when it's immobilized. The desire-sensing mechanism still exists. The internal compass is still there. It wasn't removed. It was buried. Buried under layers of approved wanting that the architecture installed on top of the authentic wanting, the way a developer paves over a garden. The garden is still underneath the concrete. The soil is still alive. Seeds are still viable, but the concrete has to be broken before anything can grow. And breaking concrete that you've been walking on for decades, concrete that feels like the ground itself, requires the willingness to believe that something living exists beneath what feels like solid, permanent, inescapable reality. The emptiness is the experience of living without access to your own desire, of going through the motions of a life that was chosen by the architecture rather than by you. And the emptiness, though it feels like nothing, is actually the compass spinning, searching for north in a life that has been oriented by someone else's map. The body keeps score. Even when the conscious mind has successfully silenced the quiet voice, the body continues registering the disconnection, the tension in the shoulders that never fully releases, the jaw clenched during sleep, the stomach that tightens before the meeting that requires the full performance, the fatigue that persists despite adequate sleep, because the energy being consumed by maintaining the performance architecture is enormous and invisible, and never accounted for in the exhaustion you report to your doctor. The body knows that the life being lived and the life that wants to be lived are not the same life, and the body communicates this knowledge through symptoms that the medical system can measure but not explain because the explanation is not medical. It's existential. The body is tired because performance is tiring. The body hurts because suppression hurts. The body is sick because disconnection, sustained across years and decades, is genuinely pathogenic, not metaphorically. Research on the health impacts of emotional suppression, chronic stress from inauthenticity, and the disconnect between lived experience and authentic desire shows measurable physiological consequences. The emptiness isn't just a feeling, it's a condition. And the condition, left unaddressed, becomes the body's permanent state. Chapter 3. What the voice is actually saying, the message under the noise. The quiet voice isn't screaming randomly. It has a message, a specific, coherent, addressable message that has been consistent since the voice first began speaking, and that will remain consistent until the message is finally heard. The message isn't complicated. The complications are in the noise you've built around it to avoid hearing it. The message has 3 parts. Each part is simple. Each part is terrifying. And each part, once heard and acknowledged, begins to dissolve the emptiness in ways that no external achievement, no lifestyle upgrade, no consumption, and no distraction has ever been able to. Part 1. This isn't what I want. The voice is telling you that the life you're living, some significant portion of it was chosen by the performance architecture rather than by you. The job you tolerate rather than love. The relationship you maintain rather than cherish. The daily routine you endure rather than enjoy. The goals you pursue because they were expected rather than because they emerged from genuine desire. The voice isn't saying everything is wrong. It's saying something is wrong, something specific. Something you already know at the level below thought, the level where the body tightens and the energy drains and the flatness settles over the morning like fog. This is crucial. This isn't what I want is not the same as I don't know what I want. The voice knows what you want. It has always known. The problem isn't the absence of desire. It's the disconnection from desire. The architecture stands between you and the voice, filtering its message, translating "this isn't what I want" into safer versions like "I should be grateful for what I have," and "lots of people would love to be in my position," and "I just need a vacation." The translations sound reasonable. They're the architecture talking. The architecture that was built to keep you performing. The architecture that interprets any movement toward authenticity as a threat to the approval system that the architecture exists to protect. Part 2. I am more than this performance. The voice is telling you that the version of yourself you present to the world, the competent professional, the good partner, the reliable friend, the appropriate adult, is a fraction of who you actually are. There are parts of you that the performance has never included. Creative impulses that were deemed impractical and shelved. Opinions that were deemed controversial and swallowed. Emotional depths that were deemed inappropriate and sealed. Ambitions that were deemed unrealistic and buried. The voice is telling you that these excluded parts are not flaws to be managed. They're essential components of a complete self that the performance amputated for the convenience of fitting into systems that were never designed to hold a whole person. Part 3. This is not sustainable. The voice is telling you that the performance is consuming more than it's producing. That the energy budget of maintaining the gap between who you are and who you present is in deficit, and the deficit is growing. Every year the performance requires more energy because the gap widens as the authentic self continues developing beneath the architecture, pressing against it, needing more active suppression to keep contained. The emptiness, which was once a background hum easily drowned by the noise of early career ambition and new relationship excitement, and the general forward momentum of young adulthood, has become a foreground experience that occupies more of your awareness each year. Some mornings you wake up and the emptiness is the first thing you feel, before the alarm, before the coffee, before the performance boots up and covers the emptiness with the day's schedule. Those mornings are the voice's clearest signal. The body's symptoms are getting louder because the body's patience is finite even if your tolerance for inauthenticity has been trained to seem infinite. The tension, the fatigue, the digestive issues, the headaches that appear on Sunday evening and dissolve by Monday afternoon, not because the headache had a biological timeline, but because the performance activated and the body fell into line. The voice is telling you that the trajectory of the performance, the direction it's heading if nothing changes, leads somewhere you don't want to go, not to crisis necessarily, not to a dramatic breakdown that forces change, something worse than crisis, something quieter and more devastating, a life completed without ever having been fully lived, decades passed without presence, milestones achieved without joy. A retirement arrived at with the body depleted by the performance and the authentic self still waiting, still pressing against the glass, still trying to make contact with a person who ran out of years before they ran out of excuses. The voice is telling you that arriving at the end and realizing that the person who lived the life was the performance, not you, that you were present for all of it and missed all of it because the frosted glass was between you and the world the entire time, is the outcome the current trajectory produces. Not might produce, produces, unless something changes. And the something that needs to change is not your circumstances, not your job, not your relationship, not your city. The something is the glass itself. The performance layer, the architecture that stands between you and your own life. Most people miss this about why the voice's message feels so threatening, even though the message itself is an invitation to a better life. The threat isn't in the message. The threat is in the implications. If this isn't what I want is true, then decades of choices were the architecture's choices, not yours, and the grief of that recognition is enormous. If I am more than this performance is true, then the person everyone knows and approves of is incomplete, and the complete version might not receive the same approval. If this is not sustainable is true, then change is required, and change means disrupting the systems, the relationships, the routines, the identity that the performance built and that other people now depend on and expect. The voice's message is an invitation to wholeness, but the path to wholeness passes through grief, through risk, and through the dismantling of a structure that, however suffocating, has been the only home you've known. Chapter 4. Why the System Needs You Empty, the Economics of Disconnection. The emptiness isn't just a personal condition. It's an economic asset. A person disconnected from their authentic desires is a person whose desires can be manufactured. And manufactured desire, as described across every previous audiobook in this series, is the fuel that runs the consumer economy. The system doesn't just fail to help you reconnect with your authentic self. It actively profits from the disconnection, and it has built an entire infrastructure to maintain it. The consumption substitution. When you're disconnected from authentic desire, you can't pursue what you actually want because you can't identify what you actually want. The desire-sensing mechanism is buried under the concrete of the performance architecture, but the wanting doesn't stop. The human organism is designed to want, to reach toward things, to seek satisfaction. The wanting continues even when the connection to authentic wanting has been severed. And the disconnected wanting, unable to identify its real object, becomes a free-floating hunger that attaches to whatever the environment offers. The system offers consumption. Buy the thing, take the trip, upgrade the phone, renovate the kitchen, replace the wardrobe. Each consumption event produces a brief sensation that mimics the feeling of desire being met. The new purchase arrives, and for a moment, sometimes an hour, sometimes a day, the void contracts. Something entered the space. Something filled it. The relief is real. The satisfaction is genuine in the instant it occurs. But the satisfaction fades because the consumption was never addressing the actual want. The actual want, buried under the performance architecture, remains unfulfilled. The void reasserts itself, and the cycle repeats. Feel the emptiness, seek the filling, consume, brief relief, return of emptiness, feel the emptiness again, seek the filling again. The cycle described in every previous audiobook in this series, the wanting machine, the hedonic treadmill, the consumption loop, all of them depend on the emptiness as their starting condition. The emptiness is the entry point. Without the disconnection from authentic desire, the manufactured desire has no void to fill, no hunger to exploit, no free-floating wanting to redirect toward products and services and lifestyle upgrades. The system needs you empty because empty people consume. Full people, people connected to their authentic desires and actually pursuing them, don't need the substitution. They already have what they want, and what they want usually costs less than the substitution. This is crucial. The consumption substitution explains a phenomenon that confuses millions of people every day. The phenomenon of buying something you genuinely wanted, something you researched and chose and anticipated, receiving it, enjoying it for a brief period, and then feeling the exact same emptiness as before. Not diminished emptiness. The same emptiness. As if the purchase never happened. The confusion is acute because the consumption was supposed to fill the void. The advertisements explicitly or implicitly promised it would. The cultural narrative confirmed it would. Your peers, themselves caught in the same substitution cycle, appeared to have been filled by their purchases. The person on social media looked happy with the new thing. The friend seemed satisfied with the upgrade. Everyone else seemed to be finding the fulfillment that you can't find no matter what you buy. But the void isn't a consumption-shaped void. It's an authenticity-shaped void. And consumption can't fill an authenticity-shaped void any more than food can fill a loneliness-shaped hunger. You can eat until you're physically ill and still feel the loneliness because the hunger was never about food. You can consume until your closets overflow and your credit cards are maxed and your house is filled with objects and still feel the emptiness because the wanting was never about objects. The shapes don't match. But the system keeps offering consumption as the solution because consumption generates revenue and authenticity generates nothing the system can monetize. Your disconnection from yourself is one of the most profitable conditions in the economy, and the economy has no incentive to cure it. The productivity substitution. For people who don't find relief in consumption, who have perhaps seen through the consumption cycle or who simply don't respond to material acquisition, the system offers a second substitution. Work, productivity, achievement, ambition deployed as a replacement for authentic purpose. The emptiness that consumption can't fill might be filled by the next promotion, the next project delivered, the next goal accomplished, the next line added to the resume, the next recognition from the people whose approval the architecture was built to secure. The productivity substitution is more socially respected than the consumption substitution. It's celebrated, even. The workaholic is admired for their dedication. The high achiever is envied for their discipline. The person who fills every waking hour with productive activity is praised as a model of ambition and drive. Nobody stages an intervention for the person who works 80 hours a week the way they might for the person who drinks every night or shops compulsively. The productivity substitution receives social approval that makes it invisible as a coping mechanism. But the mechanism is identical to the consumption mechanism. The achievement briefly mimics the feeling of purposeful living. The brief feeling fades as the hedonic adaptation does its work. The emptiness returns, sometimes deeper than before. The next achievement is pursued with greater intensity to compensate for the diminishing return. The cycle runs. Most people miss this about why the productivity substitution is more dangerous than the consumption substitution. At least the person caught in the consumption cycle occasionally suspects that the buying isn't making them happy. The evidence is hard to ignore. The closet full of unused purchases. The credit card bill that produces anxiety instead of satisfaction. The moment of clarity after the package arrives and the excitement dies within hours, and the emptiness reasserts itself, and the person thinks, just for a second, why did I buy this? But the person caught in the productivity cycle has no such evidence. Their substitution looks like success. It looks like ambition. It looks like the life that motivational speakers describe and business magazines celebrate and parents point to as examples for their children. The high-achieving professional who works 70 hours a week and fills every evening and weekend with projects and goals and self-improvement initiatives is performing the most socially approved version of emptiness management available in the modern world. And because the management is approved, celebrated, rewarded with promotions and raises and social status, they never question it. They push harder, achieve more, fill the calendar tighter. And the emptiness deepens because the achievements, like the purchases, are the architecture's goals, not the authentic self's goals. And the authentic self, buried deeper with each achievement that doesn't belong to it, screams louder. And the screaming is drowned out by the productivity, by the busyness, by the relentless noise of a life that looks extraordinary from every external angle and feels like nothing from the inside. The distraction infrastructure. Beyond consumption and productivity, the system provides a comprehensive distraction infrastructure designed specifically to prevent the quiet moment where the voice would become audible. The infrastructure is so thorough, so seamlessly integrated into modern life, that most people don't recognize it as infrastructure at all. They experience it as entertainment, as connectivity, as the normal texture of daily life. But the function of the infrastructure, regardless of its packaging, is the prevention of silence. Streaming services that offer unlimited content so the evening never has to contain a quiet moment. The algorithm selects the next episode automatically, so you don't even have to make the decision to continue. The silence that would have existed between the end of one episode and the conscious choice to begin another has been eliminated by autoplay. Social media platforms that fill every idle moment with comparison, outrage, novelty, and stimulation. The 30 seconds waiting in line that might have been a moment of reflection becomes 30 seconds of scrolling. The 5 minutes before a meeting that might have been a moment of presence becomes 5 minutes of feeds and notifications. Podcasts for the commute so the drive or the train ride, which was once a period of enforced quiet where the mind wandered and the voice had room to speak, is now filled with someone else's thoughts. Music for the gym so the physical experience of the body, which is one of the voice's primary communication channels, is drowned in rhythm and melody. Notifications for the gaps between notifications. Alerts for the spaces between alerts. The infrastructure ensures that no moment of your waking life needs to contain silence. That no gap exists between one input and the next where the quiet voice could insert itself and say the thing it has been trying to say. And silence is the voice's medium. The voice doesn't communicate through noise. It communicates through gaps. Through the quiet moments when the performance relaxes and the authentic self, sensing an opening, tries to reach the surface. The voice speaks in the seconds before sleep when the day's noise has faded and the mind floats in the space between waking and dreaming. It speaks in the shower where the routine is automatic and the mind is briefly ungoverned. It speaks during the long drive when the podcast ends and you forget to start another one, and the car becomes quiet, and something inside you begins to surface, and you feel the discomfort of the surfacing, and you reach for the phone and the surfacing stops. The distraction infrastructure closes the opening before the communication can complete. Another episode, another scroll, another notification, another text, another piece of content that fills the space where the voice would have spoken with noise that the voice can't penetrate. The infrastructure isn't designed to prevent you from hearing your authentic self. That would require a conspiracy, and conspiracies are rare. The infrastructure is designed to capture your attention because attention is monetizable and silence is not. But the effect of capturing your attention from every moment of silence is identical to the effect of deliberately preventing you from hearing the voice. The mechanism is economic. The result is existential. And the result is that millions of people go weeks, months, sometimes years without a single moment of genuine quiet in which the authentic self could speak and be heard. Chapter 5: How to Start Listening, the Practice of Coming Home. The voice doesn't need volume, it needs space. It has been speaking at the same level your entire life. What changed was not the voice's volume but the noise around it. The distraction infrastructure, the consumption cycle, the productivity engine, the performance architecture. Each one adds a layer of noise that makes the voice harder to hear. Reducing the noise, creating space, is not a dramatic act. It's a practice. A daily, ordinary, undramatic practice that slowly, over weeks and months, clears the channel between you and the part of you that knows what's wrong and knows what's needed. Practice 1. The deliberate silence, 10 minutes a day, Not meditation necessarily, though meditation serves this purpose if it works for you. Not prayer, though prayer serves this purpose if it's genuine, just silence. No phone, no screen, no podcast, no music, no input. You and the quiet, that's it. The first few times the silence will feel unbearable. Your hands will reach for the phone. Your mind will generate tasks that suddenly seem urgent. Your body will fidget. This is the performance architecture's defense against the silence. The architecture knows that silence is the voice's medium. The architecture will deploy every available distraction to prevent you from sitting in the quiet long enough for the voice to speak. Let the defenses fire. Don't fight them, just stay in the silence. The defenses exhaust themselves faster than you'd expect. And in the space that opens after the defenses quiet down, something begins to emerge. Not a word usually, not a clear message. A feeling, a texture, a sense of something beneath the flatness that is alive and present and has been waiting for exactly this opening. This is crucial. The deliberate silence is not about producing a specific insight or receiving a specific message. It's about rebuilding the connection. The connection between your conscious awareness and your authentic self has atrophied from decades of disuse. 10 minutes of silence won't restore it, but 10 minutes of silence, repeated daily, begins the repair. The way a physical therapy exercise doesn't heal the injury in a single session, but repeated sessions gradually restore the function. The silence is physical therapy for the connection between you and yourself. It's the most important practice in this chapter, and possibly in this entire audiobook, because without the connection, none of the other practices have a foundation to build on. Practice 2. The honest inventory. After the silence practice has been running for a few weeks and the connection has begun to strengthen, begin asking yourself questions that the performance architecture has been answering on your behalf. Not, what should I do with my life? That question is too large. It activates the architecture's planning system, which will immediately begin generating approved answers. Start smaller, start with today. Did I enjoy today? Not was today productive. Not was today successful. Did I enjoy it? Did any moment feel vivid, textured, alive? Or did the day pass in the same grayness as the day before? Which moments had texture, which felt flat? Where did I feel energy? Where did I feel drainage? What did I do because I wanted to, and what did I do because it was expected? These questions are not evaluative. They're diagnostic. They're mapping the terrain of your actual experience versus the performance's version of your experience. And the map, accumulated over days and weeks of honest inventory, begins to reveal a pattern. The pattern shows where the authentic self is present and where the performance is running, where the life feels like yours and where it feels like someone else's. The map doesn't tell you what to change. Not yet. First, it shows you what's true. And truth, even uncomfortable truth, is the beginning of everything that follows. Practice 3. The micro-expression. Once the silence has strengthened the connection and the inventory has revealed the map, begin expressing the authentic self in the smallest possible increments. Not a dramatic life overhaul. Not quitting the job or ending the relationship or announcing to the world that you've been performing for decades and you're done. The performance architecture will interpret any large movement as a catastrophic threat and mobilize every defense it has. Start with micro-expressions. Say the honest thing in a conversation where you would normally say the expected thing. Not the brutally honest thing, just the true thing. I didn't love that movie when the group loved it and the performance would have agreed. I'd rather stay in tonight when the invitation is on the table and the performance would have accepted. I'm not sure I agree when the consensus is forming and the performance would have nodded. Each micro-expression is tiny, trivial, almost embarrassingly small, but each one is a moment where the authentic self speaks through the performance architecture, a moment where the quiet voice becomes audible, however briefly, in the external world. And the accumulation of micro-expressions over weeks and months does something that the silence and the inventory alone cannot do. It updates the identity. It provides the brain with evidence that you are a person who expresses authentically. The same mechanism described in the previous audiobook about quitting patterns applies here. The identity model updates based on evidence. Micro-expressions are evidence, and the updated identity over time makes larger expressions possible. The honest conversation, the genuine choice, the boundary that the performance would have never allowed. Most people miss this about why micro-expressions are more effective than dramatic authenticity for reconnecting with the quiet voice. The dramatic gesture, the grand reveal, the sudden rejection of the performance activates the social system's response at maximum intensity. The people who know the performance version of you are confused, threatened, or hurt by the sudden appearance of someone they don't recognize. The social fallout consumes all available energy. The authentic self, which needed the energy for its emergence, is once again sacrificed to crisis management. The micro-expression avoids the social crisis while still providing the authentic self with expression. The change is so gradual that the social system adjusts without crisis, and the authentic self, given room to emerge incrementally, develops the strength and the confidence to eventually express itself fully. Not all at once, not in a dramatic rupture. In a gradual unfolding that the social world absorbs, because the change was small enough at each step to be integrated rather than resisted. Practice 4. The grief allowance. This practice is the most important and the most commonly skipped. As the silence, the inventory, and the micro-expressions begin to reconnect you with the quiet voice, you will encounter grief. Grief for the years spent performing. Grief for the desires that were overridden. Grief for the version of your life that might have existed if the performance architecture hadn't redirected your choices. Grief for the time that can't be recovered. This grief is not a sign that the reconnection is going wrong. It's a sign that the reconnection is going right. The grief means the authentic self is surfacing. And the authentic self, when it surfaces after decades of burial, encounters the gap between what was lived and what could have been lived. The gap is real. The grief is appropriate. Allow the grief. Don't manage it. Don't reframe it. Don't rush through it toward the positive lessons or the growth mindset or the everything happens for a reason narrative that the performance architecture will attempt to impose. The grief needs to move through you. It needs to be felt in its full weight without being redirected into productivity or consumption or any other substitution. Because the grief, fully felt and fully processed, clears the space that was occupied by the suppressed sadness of decades of disconnection. And the cleared space, once the grief has passed through, is available for something new, something you chose, something the quiet voice has been waiting to express since before you learned to silence it. Here's what actually happens when someone practices deliberate silence, honest inventory, microexpression, and grief allowance consistently for 6 months. The emptiness doesn't disappear all at once. It shifts. It becomes less like a void and more like a space. Not the terrifying absence of something that should be there, but the open availability of a room that has been cleared for occupancy. The performance architecture doesn't collapse. It softens. The performance remains available when genuinely needed, in professional contexts, in social situations where full authenticity would be inappropriate, in the protective moments where the performance serves a legitimate function. But the performance is no longer the default. It's no longer the only mode. The authentic self has reclaimed space in the daily experience of being alive. The days begin to differentiate. Tuesday feels different from Thursday because the person living Tuesday is present rather than performing. Colors seem slightly more vivid, not metaphorically. The neurological shift from suppression to expression actually changes perceptual processing. Conversations feel different because the person in the conversation is responding authentically rather than strategically. Choices feel different because the person making the choice is consulting the internal compass rather than the approval system. The emptiness is still there some days. The performance still activates automatically in certain contexts. The grief still surfaces in waves, but underneath all of it, something has changed. Something fundamental. The quiet voice is no longer screaming because the quiet voice is no longer being silenced. It's being heard. And a voice that is being heard doesn't need to scream. It can speak. And the speaking, the simple, ordinary act of the authentic self communicating through a life that is gradually becoming its own, is the thing the emptiness was marking the absence of all along. Closing thoughts, the voice was always yours. The emptiness was never evidence that something was missing from your life. It was evidence that someone was missing from your life. You. Not the version of you that performs. Not the version that the architecture built to collect approval and navigate systems and check the boxes that the world said to check. The other one. The one who existed before the corrections began. The one who knew what they felt without consulting a rule book. The one who wanted what they wanted without running it through an approval filter. The one who lived behind the frosted glass, pressing against it, fogging it with their breath, writing messages on the condensation that you almost read on the mornings when the performance hadn't fully activated and the world looked, for a moment, like it might be beautiful. That person isn't gone. That person is the quiet voice. And the quiet voice was never quiet by nature. It was quieted by training, by architecture, by a world that needed you performing rather than living, and that built the systems to ensure the performance continued uninterrupted from childhood through old age. The systems are real. The architecture is real. The training was thorough. The performance has been running for so long that it feels like who you are. But underneath the performance, in the silence between the noise, there is a self that feels like home. A self that doesn't need the approval to feel worthy. A self that doesn't need the achievement to feel purposeful. A self that doesn't need the consumption to feel full. A self that was full before any of it started, and that has been waiting, patiently and persistently, for the moment when you would finally stop and listen and ask the only question that ever mattered. What do you actually want? Not what should you want, not what would they approve of, not what looks good or sounds right or checks the next box. What do you want? The quiet voice knows. It has always known. All it needs is for you to listen.